The morning they discharged me from the ICU, I asked the nurse if I could have a few extra minutes alone before my wife came in. She said yes, without asking why. I think she already knew. I had been in that step-down unit for 11 days. 11 days of ceiling tiles and the low hum of monitors and the particular kind of silence that settles over a man when everyone around him is pretending everything is fine. My left leg had been reconstructed with 2 titanium rods. My right knee had been shattered and rebuilt. The fall from the scaffolding at the Hargrove project site had taken about 3 seconds. The recovery, they told me, would take the better part of a year. I was 63 years old. I'd been a structural engineer for 37 years. I'd never missed a deadline, never lost a client, never walked away from a job unfinished. I'd also never believed, not once in 29 years of marriage, that my wife was capable of what she did. Her name was Patricia. Most people called her Pat. I still called her by her full name, the way I had the first time I introduced her at a job site dinner back in 1997. She had laughed and said it made her sound like a school teacher. I told her I thought school teachers deserved more respect than they got. She had squeezed my hand under the table. That was a long time ago. The fall happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I had a lunch meeting scheduled with my business partner, a man named Gerald, and I had been thinking about whether to take the highway or the back road to the restaurant when my boot caught the edge of the platform and the world tilted sideways in a way that had no correction. I woke up 2 days later with my daughter sitting beside me. Her name is Renee. She is 31 and she has my mother's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and she was holding my hand so tightly when I opened my eyes that I felt it before I saw her. She said, "Dad, just Dad," and then she put her forehead down on the edge of the mattress and didn't say anything else for a long time. My wife arrived an hour later. She stood in the doorway first. I noticed that. She stood in the doorway and looked at the room the way a person looks at a situation they are calculating, not grieving. Then she came in, kissed my forehead, and asked the nurse how long the recovery was expected to take. Not, "How are you?" Not, "I was so scared." "How long is the recovery?" I filed that away. The doctors were careful and thorough. The damage to my legs was significant but not permanent, they said, as long as I committed to physical therapy and gave my body the time it needed. The risk was rushing it. The risk was trying to be who I was before my body was ready to let me be that again. I told them I understood. What I did not tell them was that I had already started making calls. On the 4th day, my insurance coordinator, a woman from the company's HR department named Diane, came to see me. She was apologetic in the way people are when they have to deliver information they did not create but will be blamed for anyway. She sat in the chair beside my bed and she opened a folder and she told me that my health coverage had been modified 61 days before the accident. I asked her to repeat that. She did. The primary policyholder designation on my employer supplemental plan had been changed. The change had been authorized using my login credentials and submitted through the online portal. The new designation routed a significant portion of claim reimbursements through a secondary account that was not our joint household account. I asked whose account it was. She said she wasn't able to confirm that from the documents she had, but that the insurance company's fraud review team had flagged the modification because of its proximity to a major claim event. I thanked her. I asked her to leave the folder. After she left, I lay there for a long time without moving. Outside the window, there was a parking garage, and above it a strip of pale November sky, and I watched a pigeon walk back and forth on a concrete ledge doing nothing in particular. And I thought about 29 years, and I thought about the way my wife had stood in the doorway. Then I picked up my phone and called my attorney. His name is Carl. We have known each other since our boys played baseball together in the mid-90s. He is not a dramatic man. He does not make speeches or use words like egregious or unconscionable in casual conversation. What he does is listen very carefully and then speak very precisely. And I have never once walked away from a conversation with Carl feeling like I had been given anything other than the exact truth. He listened to everything I told him. Then he said, "Don't do anything yet. Don't confront her. Don't move money. Don't change anything. Just give me 72 hours. I said, "Carl, I'm lying in a hospital bed with 2 rods in my left leg." He said, "I know. That's why I need you to stay exactly where you are and let me work." So I did. My wife visited every other day. She brought the things I asked for: a specific brand of crossword puzzle books, my reading glasses from the nightstand, the good slippers. She sat in the chair and she talked about the house and a problem with the gutters and a dinner she'd had with her sister. She did not ask about the investigation. She did not ask about the insurance coordinator's visit. Either she didn't know Diane had come, or she was very good at not knowing. I had started to wonder, after 29 years, how much I had ever really known her. On the 8th day, Carl called me back. He spoke for about 12 minutes. I did not interrupt him. The secondary account belonged to a man named Philip. He was 44 years old. He worked in commercial real estate, and he had been, based on phone records and financial transfers Carl's investigator had traced, in a relationship with my wife for approximately 2 years. 2 years. I had been falling off a scaffold for 3 seconds, and she had been building an exit strategy for 2 years. Carl told me there was more. He told me that 14 months ago my wife had consulted a divorce attorney. He told me that 3 months before my accident, she had moved a portion of our joint savings, not enough to trigger an automatic alert, but enough to matter, into an account I was not on. He told me that the insurance modification was not an isolated act of opportunism. It was the last piece of a plan that had been assembling itself quietly in the background of my life, while I was looking at blueprints and load calculations and the particular problem of how to make structures hold. I thanked Carl. He said, "I'm sorry, Raymond." I said, "Don't be. Just tell me what we do next." He told me. I lay there after we hung up and I looked at the ceiling and I did not cry. I want to be honest about that. I did not cry, not because I was not hurt, but because the hurt had already happened somewhere in the first 4 days when I was watching my wife stand in doorways and ask about recovery timelines, and what I felt now was something quieter and more purposeful than grief. I felt like a man who had just been handed a set of plans for a building that was designed to collapse and been given enough time to read them before the demolition crew arrived. On the 9th day, my wife came in with coffee from the good place down the street. She set it on my tray table and she sat down, and she looked at me in a way that felt rehearsed, and then she opened her bag and she took out an envelope and she set it on the tray table beside the coffee. She said, "Raymond, I've been meaning to talk to you about this for a while. The timing is terrible, I know that, but I think we both know things haven't been right between us for a long time." I looked at the envelope. She said, "I need you to sign these. My attorney says the sooner we start the process, the better for both of us. There are provisions in there for the medical costs. You won't be left with nothing. I want you to understand what was in that sentence. You won't be left with nothing. That was the reassurance she offered me. Not, I still care about you. Not, I'm sorry for the years. You won't be left with nothing. I picked up the envelope. She watched me open it with an expression I can only describe as carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that requires effort. I read through the first several pages. The language was what Carl had told me to expect, a standard dissolution filing with asset provisions that had been structured very deliberately to favor her position. The valuation of my stake in the engineering firm I had built with Gerald over 22 years had been listed at roughly 40% of what a legitimate appraisal would show. The retirement accounts had been divided in a way that appeared equitable on paper, but was not. Once you understood which accounts had been quietly drained over the preceding months, she said, my attorney went over everything very carefully. It's fair. I said, can I borrow your pen? She looked surprised for just a moment. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a pen. I signed my name on the designated line. She took the envelope back, and she looked at my signature, and something passed across her face that I think was relief and possibly triumph, though she tried not to let the second one show. She said, I think this is the right thing for both of us, Raymond. I really do. I said, I know you do. She left 20 minutes later. She took the coffee she'd brought me. I don't think she realized she'd done it. I called Carl. He said, she came. I said, she came. He said, and you signed. I said, I signed. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, good, because the valuation they used for your firm's stake will require a formal appraisal under state law before any dissolution is finalized. And once that appraisal is conducted and compared to the figure in those papers, her attorney is going to have a significant problem. And that's before we file the fraudulent insurance modification complaint with the state insurance commissioner, and before we present the financial transfer records to the court, and before the firm's partnership agreement triggers the clause that Gerald and I added in 2019 that says any involuntary dissolution of a partner's interest due to legal proceedings initiated by the partner's spouse requires full fair market buyout. I said, Carl, how long have you been waiting to use that clause? He said, since the day you told me you were worried about her. I had told him that 14 months ago. Quietly, over coffee, the way men of a certain age tell each other things they can't quite say out loud to anyone else. I had said, I think something's wrong, and I don't know what it is yet. Carl had listened, and then he had said, let me make a call. That call had led to some careful additions to the partnership agreement. Nothing that looked unusual. Just good legal housekeeping, which is what Carl called it. I lay back against my pillow. I had 2 titanium rods in my leg and 11 days of hospital ceiling tiles behind me and a marriage that had been ending for 2 years without my formal permission. And I felt, for the first time since I woke up in that room, like I could breathe correctly. Renee came that evening. She brought Chinese food from the place I like, and she sat on the edge of the bed the way she used to sit on the edge of my desk when she was small and I was working late. And she said, Dad, are you going to be okay? I said, yes. She said, Mom called me. She told me you signed the papers. I said, I did. Renee was quiet for a moment. She's not a person who fills silence carelessly. She picked up a container of fried rice and handed me a fork and said, she sounded like she'd won something. I said, people often do, right before they find out what game they were actually playing. Renee looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "What did you do, Dad?" I told her most of it, not all of it. She is my daughter, and there are things a father keeps to himself, not because he doesn't trust his child, but because some weights are not meant to be shared, only carried. She listened without interrupting, which is something I always loved about her, and when I finished, she was quiet again, and then she said, "Carl's been busy." I said, "Carl is always busy." She almost smiled. She looked like my mother when she almost smiled. The following weeks were not simple. Recovery is not a story that moves in one direction. There were days when the physical therapist, a methodical young man named Darnell, would work with me for an hour, and I would feel genuinely like myself again. And there were days when I could not make my leg do what I asked it to do, and the frustration of that was its own particular kind of grief, separate from everything else. I had to learn to be patient with my own body, which is not a skill that comes naturally to men who have spent their lives solving problems with planning and precision. But I did it. The formal appraisal of my firm stake was completed 6 weeks after I was discharged. The number came back at 2.5 times what my wife's attorney had listed in the dissolution papers. Her attorney filed a motion to contest it. Carl responded with the financial transfer records and the insurance fraud documentation in a single organized package that he described to me afterward as, and I'm quoting him exactly, "one of the tidiest things I've ever handed a judge." The insurance commissioner's office opened a formal investigation. The account the rerouted reimbursements had been directed to was, as Carl had suspected, in Philip's name. The total diverted was not enormous by some standards, but it was enough to constitute insurance fraud under state statute, and the investigation's scope expanded in ways I was not involved in and did not need to be. My wife's attorney withdrew from the case in the 4th month. The final settlement was negotiated over 3 sessions. I did not attend any of them personally. Carl went. He called me after each one with updates in the precise, unhurried way he always delivers information, and I sat in my home, which I had moved back into because it was my home, and I drank my coffee and I listened and I said very little. The settlement reflected the accurate valuation of everything we had built. The partnership clause was honored. The retirement accounts were corrected. There were consequences attached to the financial transfers that I will not detail here, because they are not my story to tell, only to have lived through. I will tell you what I think about at night, though, when the house is quiet and my leg aches the way it will probably always ache now, and I'm lying in the dark thinking about 37 years of buildings and the particular mathematics of what holds. I think about the fact that she gave me a pen. She brought papers designed to take nearly everything I had worked for. She set them on my tray table next to a coffee she would later take back, and then she handed me a pen, and she watched me sign my name, and she thought it was over. What she did not know, what she could not have known, because I had not told her, because some things you keep close until the moment they matter, was that I had spent my entire career understanding how structures fail. I had spent 37 years learning to read the plans that looked right and find the flaw, the load the calculation had missed, the point where everything would come apart if pressure was applied in exactly the right place. She handed me a pen. She asked me to sign my name. She did not know that my attorney had spent 14 months making sure that my signature on those specific papers in that specific form, with those specific provisions, was the most useful thing she could possibly ask me to do. I signed it, and then I let it work. I'm 63 years old, and I have 2 rods in my left leg, and I am, By most external measures, more or less the same man I was the morning I fell off that scaffold. I go to work, I review plans, I have lunch with Gerald on Thursdays, I talk to Renee on Sundays. I do the crossword puzzles, the ones from the good book, with a pen. What I am not is what she thought she was leaving behind when she stood in that doorway and made her calculations. I was never that man. She just didn't know it until the papers were filed. I don't tell this story because I'm proud of it, exactly, or because I want anyone to feel sorry for me, or because I think betrayal is something you get over the way you get over a cold. I tell it because I spent 11 days lying in a hospital room looking at a parking garage and a strip of November sky, and during those 11 days I had a choice about what kind of man I was going to be on the other side of it. I chose to be the kind who reads the plans before he signs anything, and I chose to be the kind who already had better plans in place. That's all. That's the whole story. If you're going through something like this, if you're in a moment where you feel like everything is being decided for you, where the ground has shifted and you don't recognize the room you're in, I just want to say one thing. Don't react yet. Don't let the anger or the hurt make your decisions. Call the people who know how to read the fine print. Give it 72 hours. Structures don't fail all at once, and they don't hold all at once either. It's always about where you put the support and when. I know a thing or two about that.